So today's lecture, more or less, is based on something I've been writing for about a year. I've only written about 7,000 words. So when you think about achievers in life, and you think about, oh, Apar is doing all of this stuff, I can be very, very lazy, and it can take time for me to also complete my projects. Okay. And through this period of time, I'm trying to write a non-fiction book about 3 decades of the political economy of technology in India. And it's really interesting because I think there are some books which exist, but they don't completely capture how is the Information Technology Act, for instance, made, in what surrounding circumstances was it changed, who was the minister who introduced it, what were the debates which happened in parliament at that point in time. So I think as much as this all exists as case law or as a text in your library explaining this section or that section, it doesn't set the larger interests which have shaped the law which we see around us. So today's lecture is a legal lecture in some ways, given it's a law school, but it's also a policy lecture. And to understand policy, you have to understand what are the economic, what are the social, and what are the political incentives which work in any kind of legal regulation. So I hope to touch upon 3 broad areas. The first is the growth in teleconnectivity, just in terms of tele-density, which we've seen over the past decade, but which also matches with the government interest for increase of sensorial control. The second thing is the institutionalization of website blocking, content takedowns, and internet shutdowns, which is a form of censorship again. And the third is that what does it mean for democratic polity and media freedoms, which coexist in what is quite often called a techno-totalitarian state. And it's not as if India is a techno-totalitarian state. What I mean by it is that there are gradations of a country being a democracy and veering towards being autocratic or compromising on those kind of values. And it's a spectrum. Okay. So the first thing I want to touch upon, because the title of today's talk is around Digital India, is what is Digital India and what do you understand by Digital India as a political program? Now, Digital India as a program was one of the first union government programs which were announced directly by the Prime Minister and by the Minister of Electronics and Technology. Okay. And if you go to YouTube and you put in the Digital India launch, they are actually the heads of industry, Indian industry, which includes the founders of the big 2, okay, corporations, but also you have people from the technology industry like Mr. Azim Premji is there, etc., etc. And there the Prime Minister announces that Digital India is going to change India into a much more technocratic state by using digital technologies. And we are going to overcome a lot of the social and economic deficiencies in which a lot of people face gaps in, let's say, welfare services, or they do not have access to the internet. Okay. Now, what is important to remember here is that there has been a large amount of courting as well as collaboration with the private sector at the very start of the Digital India program. And this becomes much more clearer when Mr. Modi visits Silicon Valley and meets the heads of various technology companies in a sit down, and he states that countries which were drawing strength for their democracies from their constitutions now draw it from technology. So the very basis of actualizing your rights, your social, economic, liberty rights, does not come from the text of a constitution. It comes from, let's say, a smartphone. That is that same visit in which he also separately meets Mark Zuckerberg, talks about his mother, etc., etc. You can go back and look at it, okay? And as a policy framework, when it aims to transform a lot of these things, it's still kept fairly vague. What does it mean? But one thing is very clear. If you even go back to the earlier policies on digitization or computerization, which started from the mid-1990s or the late 1990s, it all was towards ensuring that more people in India could have access to personal computers, could be connected online. So it matches with what was a teleconnectivity issue into a broadband access issue. That's been consistent across the political spectrum, where there has been investment, there has been government policy. Now, in terms of what it means as political branding, I've only stated it, but what needs to be understood is that the technology components of the Digital India program are not clearly spelled out in 2014 and 15. And which is why, if you go back in time in 2014 and 15, you do not find any mention of digital public infrastructure. It only comes about 3.5, 4 years back. And even Aadhaar, which was predating this, it was set up around 2009-10 through a planning commission process, is not conceptualized as a digital public infrastructure. It is mentioned as one of the things in the Digital India program, but it's not the primary method of delivering that. And if you go back even further, you will notice that during the Rajiv Gandhi government, he tried computerization very widely and there were large-scale protests against that. There were fears of unemployment, and there are derisive articles on the kind of advisory group which he picked, and it was called a government of computer boys. This is before the Bofors scandal. So computerization, delivering technology and hoping that people get access to food, India develops, there's higher teleconnectivity, has been rebranded in some ways into what is Digital India. So you can go on the Digital India website and you can have a look. If you're interested, you can put it in the Wayback Machine and you can see the changes in the pages and the policy statement. It's not a clear policy statement, which is annually reviewed in that sense. The second thing is that India, under the Digital India program, at least over the past 5 to 6 years, has had Digital India Weeks, which is like a pageant of technology, and it's organized in Ahmedabad. And every year, there are statements which are made around the Digital India program, but more often than not, it is a retrospective of how India is utilizing technology in its private sector to build local startups and how it's a very important economic component of our society. So it will shift year to year. 2 years back, it will go to semiconductors. This year, it will go towards AI. 5 years ago, it will go towards Silicon Valley companies, offshoring of software, and greater employment. So again, I will just re-emphasize that the Digital India program is fairly nebulous. It's not well defined and articulated like a policy document. Okay. Now, you can also look at the press releases which are there on the PIB, and there is a actual basis of how then through reference Digital India is being stated to be a success. Now, if you go to the Press Information Bureau, they said due to Digital India, there's been an increase in broadband connectivity from 6.1 crores in 2014, that's the number of connections, to 83.2 crores in 2023 with the lowest mobile data rates. Okay, India has the lowest mobile data rates. There's no question in that. I accept that as well. And the broadband teleconnectivity in cities like Delhi is, as per the TRAI reports, about 2.8 connections for every person. But that does not mean every person has a mobile connection or a broadband connection. Sometimes it means entire families don't have it. Sometimes it means that one person has 5 connections actually. Okay. The second is that the PIB releases also state regularly that India has the highest number of users of social media, right? Which is enabled by these data rates. And third, much more recently, what I've noticed is that Digital India and digital public infrastructure are synonymous. It relies on the Aadhaar biometric ID database, and which allows a lot of other functions such as opening bank accounts, UPI, etc., etc. But what is important is if you go to indiastack.global and you see the other DPIs which have been built, you may not have heard about them. And if you would have heard about them, then they would not have been constitutionally consistent. Think about Arogya Setu. Think about COVID. Now, COVID is also regarded as, for instance, a success because it enabled bookings for vaccination as well as rationing for vaccination of the COVID-19 vaccine as and when required through a digital system, right? But there are studies which have shown through regression-based qualitative analysis that this preferred men in urban areas more than any other demographic. Because initially when COVID was launched, it was the only way people within the 18 to 45 age group could get vaccinated at the height of the second wave of the pandemic, which meant it was a life-saving vaccine. And it was only launched and accessible through the internet. It was only in English. It required an OTP, which meant that you needed to know English. You needed to try it again and again to book a slot, and you needed to have a smartphone with internet. So it's disqualified a lot of people from the beginning itself. Or you look at, let's say, Arogya Setu, where there is no clear ownership of which public department was involved in that contact tracing application, and the kind of data which was gathered was not subject to any clear legal framework. And in fact, even subsequently, there was a voluntary protocol which was made for data protection, which was not renewed, and it is not known if the data has been destroyed, which includes movement data, sensitive personal data, including your medical health history, etc., etc. You can look at the other components of the India Stack deployments. GEM, which is the government e-marketplace, the Amazon for government procurement. So if you go to it, any government department which gets union funds can only place orders through GEM. But GEM is set up like a platform and charges a platform fees of 1%, irrespective of how the tender is executed at a subsequent point in time. What that means is that if I'm a private contractor, right, I have an incentive of listing a product, let's say that's MacBook, for 2 lakh rupees when it sells in the market for 1 lakh rupees, because if the government does not pay me tomorrow or if the contract goes into dispute, I still at the very beginning have to pay GEM 1% the minute the contract is concluded for the contract value. And there are a lot of incorrect incentives in GEM. And if you go and you put GEM in your in Google News, for instance, you will see that the minister in charge of that platform, Mr. Vijh, has been stating how they will again and again change the backend. A lot of these deployments, like GEM, are also occurring through private companies in which there's a government partnership without any clear basis of law. And that's the same thing which you notice in criticisms of ONDC. So what I'm trying to also explain is that digital public infrastructure is not just Aadhaar, it is not just UPI, and even within these deployments, there's substantial critique, so I'm not getting into it. But what needs to be remembered is that digital public infrastructure, when you look at it, you look at the G20 statement, what should digital public infrastructure be? If you go to indiastack.global, which is our way of showing the world what DPI we have actually built, if you leave the most visible deployments of digital public infrastructure, a lot of it appears to be just like the highway to Sonipat. Okay, it shows you 1 hour, 15 minutes, but it takes 1 hour more to reach here. The road is broken quite often, and sometimes there are no walkways for the pedestrians. Okay. Now, digital India, as it grows, as this teleconnectivity grows, also leads to a lot of platform regulation, which happens on intermediaries to safe harbor framework in Section 79, website blocking, which is Section 69A, and Section 5.2 of the Telegraph Act. Now you will say, wait, Apar, these are laws which were made by the UPA. Yes, they were made by the UPA, which is very important for us to understand. Okay, now Section 79 of the Information Technology Act actually comes from, and lawyers and law students know about this, it comes from the model law on e-commerce and partly inspired by the 1995 EU regulation also on safe harbor frameworks, okay? And it's the MLEC actually, the model law on electronic commerce at that point in time, which is being drafted by UNICEF Raj. India is the president at that time. Okay, the minister is Pramod Mahajan, and he brings it in. It's sent to a parliamentary standing committee, and then it's passed. 79 at that point in time does not provide safe harbor from offenses beyond the IT Act. So if there's an offense, let's say for obscenity, there's a provision under the Information Technology Act, but there's also provision under the Indian Penal Code. Okay, so it's kind of not well drafted because the prosecution under the Indian Penal Code will continue because the notwithstanding anything else contained under this act is the phrase rather than notwithstanding anything else contained in any other law for the time being. Okay, this is an issue and this is changed later. Now you have the second thing is website blocking. The website blocking provision comes after the Mumbai terror attacks and the internet shutdown power is refashioned. And I think the first internet shutdown takes place in about 2009, 2010 in Srinagar on August 14th because there are curfew restrictions which are historically placed one day before Independence Day in Srinagar, which have been historically been happening for a long period of time. Okay, so it's a security concern. Okay, now if you look at why the law and why our relationship with technology, not only due to the big platforms and how it's optimized our smartphones towards doom scrolling, towards those mental impacts which we have, but also directly how the law has been shaped. I've been working on understanding it from a series of factual incidents which have more or less shocked our system, right? If you even notice how Parliament functions much more recently, of course, you have the economic policy arguments which are gestating for a long period of time and may lead to legislation, but there are also certain events which lead to a level of metropolitan outrage or a level of upper middle class or visible English media kind of demands from legislators make a law fix this issue as a notional fix point. So one of the first ones is the Avnish Bajaj case. The Avnish Bajaj case was actually a case in which it's been integrated in popular culture as well. So if you watched Dev D or LSD or one of those kind of movies, it's been dramatized and this is why also any kind of pornographic clip in India is colloquially referred to as a MMS. Because two minors in Delhi Public School, R.K. Puram, shot a consensual video and then non-consensually, one of the minors in that shared it over an MMS. It was stored pre-smartphone. It was dumb phone, one of those Debian devices, Nokia ones. But it caused a kind of what would I call it? It not only a moral panic, but because it posed also a kind of a very kind of a perverse curiosity which exists in closed societies, patriarchal societies, where men are interested in watching things which are considered taboo, right? So, so this led to it being shared inevitably as much as the newspapers were crying about it. But this was discovered later. First, the sharing happened. Okay, people started sharing it from Bluetooth connections, but there was one IIT student in Kharagpur who burned it on a CD, and he had a side hustle selling pirated music, etc. So he said, "Why not sell porn?" Okay, and there was an Indian version of eBay which was called Bazi, and there were two guys who ran it. One is a NRI, Avnish Bajaj. He heads BlackRock now. And he had worked in Apple, Morgan Stanley, Harvard Business School, IIT, American citizen. He sold his company to eBay, and the clip was listed on his website. There were 8 people who purchased it in India, all men, all old. And then subsequent to that, one journalist does a story on the clip being sold on Bazi. So that's the story. Okay, moral panic, the technology coming in and challenging our society, which is so safe, so secure, so nice, so polite. Okay, everyone gets married at 25, has 2 children society. Okay, so it caused a lot of outrage. The police registered an FIR. They arrested that student from IIT. But see, people will not be satisfied with that, right? The clip was sold on a company's website. So the Delhi police sends a questionnaire to Avnish Bajaj. Avnish Bajaj, like a good American who's worked in great companies and feels he's like he should just cooperate with the police, goes to the Thana, and the police says, "Oh well, these are non-bailable sections. We're sending you to Tihar." Okay, so he's an American citizen. Okay, right after his arrest, the Americans are very nationalistic in that sense. Condoleezza Rice brings up the foreign minister here. Okay, and it becomes a very big story. Fiki, Asocham, all of them issue statements. And he finally gets bail, and the case also drags on for a few years. There's a great judgment by Justice Muralidhar when he was at the High Court, quashing the IT Act prosecution, but not the IPC provision. And then under corporate liability doctrines, the Supreme Court also, in Sharat Babu Digmati, who was one of the officers in eBay, also quashes the entire prosecution, but it takes 12 years. In the meanwhile, the law is referred to by Veerappa Moily, who was the minister at that time, to an expert committee, and they change that phrase. They make the non-obstante apply to all laws. And while this expert report is pending, what happens? The 2611 Bombay attacks. Okay, now the 2611 Bombay attacks were different than other terrorist attacks because there's a great article by Ashley Tellis in which they say that why did the terrorists choose Bombay? Because that was India's Hollywood, it was India's New York. Okay, so it had the maximum amount of visibility with the highest per capita, and it attacked the sense of security which was possessed by the Indian elites, where you feel a sense of comfort, privilege, and frankly, you feel like the master of the universe when you walk into the Taj every day, right? So, in a sense, it outraged India that if this can happen to the top sections of Indian society, which was televised, dramatized every day, it can happen to anyone. And one of the significant pieces of reporting around this was that the reconnaissance around that was done through map software, the use of satellite phones. So in a lot of ways, the security apparatus was shown to be deficient both structurally, because after that they set up the NAT grade. Okay, but also they needed provisions within the IT Act. So you have this report from the expert committee which is pending that changed the IT Act. All of a sudden, it becomes there are provisions which are added for website blocking, decryption, etc., etc. And then the law passes through Parliament, in which Mr. Chidambaram stands up and he says that the country is watching, we should do something. And 26, I think 28 laws are passed in 14 minutes without any discussion. Okay? Now, what happens subsequently is that the UPA 1, UPA 2 is going along its merry way, and all of a sudden, people start disliking them. There are a variety of reasons. You can get into it. And this takes the shape and form of the India Against Corruption movement, which is also in retrospect, which one should see without romanticism, but challenges the authority of the government. People may remember who may have read about it, is that government ministers went to receive members of that movement. So it shows how weak the government is and how strong that movement is. Okay? And around that same time, there were handles of the top political and government functionaries making fun of them, legitimate satire, parody, but also sometimes straight away delegitimizing them. Okay? The government resorts out of nervousness, out of that sense of political attack, political interest, but also out of a sense of purely like, how can this happen, right? So it blocks a few handles, and even the chief minister at that time, Mr. Narendra Modi, he tweets out, as an ordinary Indian citizen, I oppose censorship, and there is a hashtag GOI blocks. In fact, even prior to, if you put it in Twitter right now, you will see a lot of right-wing accounts for the, you will be surprised who all tweeted in favor or against the blocking process, saying that it's not transparent, copies of orders are not given, etc. This has all happened before the Shreya Sinha case. Okay. And this is why it's important to understand that you may look at the Shreya Singhal case, 66A prosecutions, etc. That comes all later. That comes in 2013. It's contemporaneous a little with the Anna Hazare movement, but it is a little before that. Okay. Now you have the Shreya Singhal case, where challenges to 66A, 69A, 79 are mainstream now. Because the chief minister of one state is speaking about website blocking, website censorship. It is an issue now, right? And what happens in Palghar is that Shine Danda and Renu Srinivasan, okay, are having a conversation on Facebook where Shine Danda, after one day after the death of Bal Thackeray, writes on a Facebook, she says that great men live and die every day. A whole city today shuts down out of fear, not out of respect. And Renu Srinivasan goes below that, likes the comment, okay? I don't know, is like still anywhere? Which platform has a like on it? Okay, I've not been on Facebook for a decade. People still use it. Okay. So, and she writes, I agree with you. Now, a lot of local activists, political activists from that political party go to the police station, and the police station keeps both of them inside for their own protection. That's what they said in the Supreme Court, because they were scared. And then register the FIR on them for their own protection. The FIR starts with actually the word one Muslim girl and one Hindu girl. Okay, it starts with that line. Okay. And this becomes a very big story, that the young people in India were accessing the internet, having a conversation about the death of a political leader, have been arrested. And the metropolitan press has never been fond of Bal Thackeray. He is a recognized demagogue, according to them, right? So it's a very easy story. And then the media starts paying attention to 66A arrests, finally, as much as it's been happening for a long period of time. There are people who were arrested for making fun of our present Prime Minister as well under 66A. But the first petition is filed by Shreya Singhal. There are 10 other petitions filed. They challenge Section 66A, which is a criminal section for prosecution. Section 69A, which is the legal section for blocking, and Section 79, which is the safe harbor provision. Because when the Anna protests are also happening, the intermediaries rules for the first time are made in 2011. And they say social media platforms need to do certain compliances, which essentially are proactive filtering. They say the government does not need to tell you everything which is illegal. To be compliant, you need to even respond to private takedown requests rather than court orders or directions by police officers. Which means if a client comes to me and says that I don't like this on Instagram, I don't like this tweet, I don't like this, what is mentioned on YouTube, I can send a notice to YouTube, and YouTube will be liable if they don't take it down. Their liability starts from that point, not from the point when the court orders it. Okay. So this is why 66A, 69A, and 79 are challenged. Justice Nariman gives the judgment there. 66A is struck down. 69A is upheld with the blocking rules. 79 is read down to state that only legal orders constitute actual knowledge within the purview of 79. Okay. Then you have the Save the Internet movement. So the Shreya Singhal judgment, I think so, is given on February 24th. Okay. And in the same year, 2015, 1 month after that exactly, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India issues its first consultation paper on licensing OTT apps and net neutrality. Okay, so you can go back. There's a great LiveMint article on this. So, like, people have started knowing each other who are frankly spoiled, privileged men, okay, who talk about net freedom, okay. So, yeah, it's funny, but yeah, at least we did this. We didn't do other stuff. So, yeah. So I get a call. So I'm live tweeting the OTT paper back then. I was much younger, so I did those things. And it talks about regulation of gaming really affecting people's minds, etc., all of that. And I used to game back then. I don't now. So it seemed weird that the TRAI wants to license online gaming, multiplayer gaming. Okay. to me. And then net neutrality is something also I knew because John Oliver had ran a campaign earlier. And besides me, Nikhil is also doing it. Then we meet up for coffee in Khan Market, okay, at Amici, which used to be there, okay, and we discuss the paper. The campaign comes alive. There are 3 segments made there. There's a tech, there's a public advocacy, which is stand-up comics, and we knew the stand-up comics back then, and we didn't know they were problematic back then, honestly, because we were in Delhi. And then there are the tech guys. I make an expert paper. I vet all the scripts for the stand-up comics, and a platform is set up by Kiran in Bangalore, which can handle mass emailing to the TRAI. And that's how Save the Internet is born, and net neutrality is done. However, if you look at the academic articles around that, we also made some wrong decisions. The group, of course, lacked diversity which is why those wrong decisions were made. The first one was we relied on arguments of economic nationalism, which have not worked out that well now, like startups need this, startups need that. Okay, but we made those arguments back then and it worked really well, right? And there were other problems as well in terms of we took support from everyone. So there's an actual op-ed by Mr. Nilkani and Viral saying that net neutrality will truly be achieved when you link all internet connections with Aadhaar. He's actually written that in the Times of India. So we said, okay, we won't say we endorse it, but it's okay. And around that time, Aadhaar was also happening. But Aadhaar was happening was being noticed much more by the right to food campaigners because it was hitting the PDS systems first. Okay, so that was an institutional blind spot, and not that like 6 or 7 people should do everything, but that was a blind spot even in the press. It was only considered to be a welfare argument rather than a surveillance argument. And I think it's primarily a welfare argument. Okay, and finally, what starts happening is that internet shutdowns, which happened in 2013 in Jammu and Kashmir, start spreading to other areas. It spreads to Gujarat when the Patidar protests take place. It spreads to Tuticorin. It spreads to Maharashtra when there is a quota agitation. We start seeing that district magistrates are learning from each other because it's the same templatized order which is being used under Section 144 sometimes Section 5(2) of the Telegraph Act, sometimes both. So I actually argue one case in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says that, well, there are no rules under Section 5(2) for internet shutdowns, but the power is there. So I say, yeah, but you need to have rules to use the power. Otherwise, the power can be used unreasonably. The Supreme Court was not inclined to look at it at that point in time, but after 9 months of this dismissal, the Department of Telecom wakes up and rules are finally made. So it's institutionalized. Okay, this is before Anuradha was seen, before all of that. Okay, and this is the first term. Okay, so as I look to the political economy of the first term, and if you look at even reports which are made by, let's say, Freedom House, which is called driving a narrative and having methods of assessment which are towards attacking India, you'll be surprised that India's net freedom score actually rises 17. So the last 2 years of UPA, the net freedom score actually quantitatively dropped, and then it rose in 2014, 15, 16. That's because you had these court cases, you had a growth in teleconnectivity, because 10 points in the Freedom on the Net report quantitatively is the reason that you can't have free speech if you don't have access to the internet in the first place. So we count that as well. Okay, so there is a much more nuanced, layered understanding. And I think the government, or the union government at that time, as much as it's launching Digital India, it's still understanding what it should do. And it's a relatively popular government. It has mass support online. So it doesn't need to use the law to censor people as much. But still, the foundations are now taking shape. The cement is drying up. Okay, we are ready for further construction. Okay, now let's come to the second term. Okay, so what you notice is that the rules around IT rules are changed. Okay, and all of this stems from a speech on July 26, 2018 to a calling to attention motion, which was actually initiated by the opposition. The opposition is sick of what it calls as the IT cell of the BJP. And it says that you're saying all these things, you should go and listen to Derek O'Brien's speech. And the government says that we acknowledge this is a problem. We are going to bring in laws for that. So they bring in the IT rules. Okay. So the first draft of the IT rules is actually leaked in 2018, and it takes them 3 years because there's so much opposition to it. And this was just a notification. They don't have to get it through Parliament, right? So they make the IT rules and bang, it's not only platform regulation, right? It includes within itself regulation of online curated streaming platforms such as Amazon and Netflix. Why? Because 2 months before that, there is a large organized email campaign, just like Save the Internet, on Tandav to the Ministry of Information Broadcasting. So yeah, I don't think sending emails works anymore, just like change.org petitions. No disrespect to change.org, that's my view, okay? And I've used it earlier. But yeah, continuing, the third category is digital news platforms, right? And that's become a problem for the government as well around that time. So the government brings out all of this, then there are petitions filed in the High Court. The first one is filed by Live Law. They get a stay order only limited to themselves. Then there are petitions filed by PM Krishna and the digital news publishers in the Madras High Court, but the orders are not issued. And before that, the orders come from Agio Publications, which is Article 19, and the second one is Nikhil Wadle. And then the Madras High Court also reaffirms them. And rules 9.1 and 9.3, which relate only to digital news platforms, are stayed in terms of publication. But the expansion of power is there. The ministry still goes ahead and registers the organization. And it changes the IT rules 2 times, at least significantly. One is the fact check amendment, right? Now, internet shutdowns over the past 5 years have grown both in severity and sophistication. And the best data point on this is Manipur and how the courts are acting. Now, not only do you have Anuradha Bhasin, where after state reorganization, you have about 300 days where internet shut down. And I do consider Jammu and Kashmir important. I've worked on that case. I empathize with people in Jammu and Kashmir very deeply. I've done that litigation through and through. I've talked to people through and through. But we also have, I acknowledge the reality that at least in the Indian institutional apparatus, Jammu and Kashmir is an exception. It's viewed as an exception because exceptional conduct is tolerated there. For instance, the Public Safety Security Act there, indefinite detentions, etc. Writ remedies are ineffective, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Now, Manipur may also be falling within that state of exception, but let's see what happened in Manipur. So towards the end of the Jammu and Kashmir internet shutdown, the government comes out with a proposal, let's whitelist 100 websites. But the thing with websites is they have underlying elements which lead to underlying web addresses, buckets of AWS, and it doesn't work like that. But they don't know. So the kids in Jammu and Kashmir don't have remote education during COVID. No, nothing, right? It's essentially putting a society back 30, 40 years and forcing them to exist in a way of complete deprivation, not only OTT streaming, right? Real things. So what happens in Manipur is the government shuts it down. The High Court calls the government on a petition challenging the internet shutdown. The government says, we are okay with giving the internet, but the people have to make an application to us and sign an undertaking that then we'll give it to limited people. That's what they say. But the thing is that the argument against the government there is that it's ethically partisan, right? So who will get the internet connections and then can spread disinformation, right? You have to give it equally in that way. And then they come up with this doctrine of limited internet shutdowns. We'll put it in certain areas on certain speeds. We'll try this, we'll try that. And the telcos are asked to implement it in different ways. So I've written 3 op-eds on this, and please, I encourage you to look at it. But what you see from censorship and what you think about censorship, even in terms of internet shutdowns, that it's disproportionate. What the law is trying to do is fit the doctrine of proportionality to a technical implementation of censorship which still causes injury, but will tick off the doctrine of proportionality, which at its very root requires reasonableness, right? Or at least a limitation on state power. Now, the blocking powers also, which were being exercised, start being exercised not only by the Ministry of Electronics and IT and the Department of Telecom acting on these orders, but also the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting now, right? That also starts happening under the IT rules. And what you notice is that the orders have never been transparently disclosed, but now there are press releases issued. We blocked 12 porn websites, we banned 100 gambling websites, we banned these 20 Pakistani channels on YouTube. So this is selective transparency, which actually increases the opacity for any researcher to comprehensively understand how blocking works in India, right? And there's a petition filed at the Karnataka High Court, for instance. The Karnataka High Court upholds these powers. There's a much more recent decision on website blocking of Prior, which is a messaging app by the High Court of Delhi as well, where again, it has been, the Karnataka High Court decision has not been referred, but website blocking has been upheld. We tried building something at IFF by challenging dowry blocker that at least certain administrative law safeguards of pre-decisional hearing, notice to parties, writ remedies being available if you were given a copy of the legal orders available, but even that's been a real struggle. And we tried that with a parody website, dowry calculator, and the counter affidavit by the government said that, well, we think he may be punishable under the Dowry Prohibition Act. You should be thankful we are not prosecuting you. That's in the counter affidavit, guys. Which is why I think going even over and above the misapplication of law, the abuse of law for sedition, for criminal defamation, you have these specific instruments of censorship which are existing there. And there's a Lok Niti CSDS report based on a survey of about 10,000 respondents in 11 states, which I also assisted them in designing, in which roughly 2/3 of people say they're scared of voicing their social, political, and religious beliefs due to the threats of legal prosecution. Okay? And guess which state is the most scared?
UP.
What?
Uttar Pradesh.
No, it's close. Scared of legal prosecution, which self-censors themselves the most. Yes. Which state supports use of software such as Pegasus the most on journalists, politicians, and activists? Gujarat. So you have this weird republic in which your relationship with technology is that I'm so scared something bad may happen with me. I want the people who are bullying me to have more power. It's that kind of thing. The bad class monitor needs to be given more power so things can be set right. Okay. Now, finally, what are thoughts, challenges, and further inquiries? And the way I'm writing this, does this make sense to you? Is it interesting? Okay. How does it complement other chapters, pieces you have read recently? Is this something novel? Would you have any inputs, feedback for me? You can send it by email as well. I think there's an insufficiency of an institutional lens. Sometimes, if you read those deep policy books, right? They take one framework of pedagogy to help explain everything. Okay. And I'm not doing that. Okay. So is that an issue? Because I want to write a much more popular book, but I also wanted to not be this. Okay. What is that? Okay. You guys know it's due to you, all of you. Okay. Now, obviously in this talk, I didn't touch upon the expansion of surveillance. This is something I hope to build. Okay. Device seizures, Pegasus. And the role of censorship due to the rule of law framework, I think is very important. I think the rule of law framework differs tremendously from metropolitan cities to Sonipat to much more like different places, right? Your experience with a police officer I think, and how the police is run in each state is tremendously different. So will it be a simplification of how the law, the courts, the police, and the rule of law framework exists? There are two or three quantifiable studies I can use, but then again, they don't capture this kind of data. So looking forward to some discussion with you on this. And I know it's a very opinionated kind of stuff I've put out here, but I hope you found this enjoyable.
You can just unmute.
Or even comments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
If you could, so that others online could see.
I just wanted to, so it's very interesting.
Can we close this present? I don't want to look at it. I thought people would be dead by now, so I need to wake them up.
So I have been researching international terms for a couple of years now. I even work with Gandhi. And I was very interested in what you had to say, especially about Kashmir, because that is my area of work. Why did you say that Kashmir is a state of exception, especially because there are so many political theories around the state of exception? We have permanent emergency that we can relate with Kashmir, and the politics that informs all of that. And even if you do an intellectual reading of international orders that have come out in the ministry itself, which is what we are working on as a part of the Rosa project, you find out that it's very politically motivated.
Yes.
And there are words that particularly only resonate with international orders that come out of Kashmir. For example, public emergency or public mobility or most of it relates to quote-unquote terrorism, which they have not defined anywhere. Or for example, weapons that they have procured, which warrants, weapons that they have procured in a particular district, which warrants an international shutdown in all of Kashmir. So what would your take be on that, considering that you told, I acknowledge that I feel bad for what happens in Kashmir, but I don't want to get involved there.
So my position publicly, and it's been challenged by a lot of friends, and I don't know whether I'll keep it my entire life, is that if I'm a constitutionalist, I have to accept that all fundamental rights should apply equally to Kashmir, and the limitations need to be as limited as possible, and they're completely disproportionate. So human life needs to be put on the same plane for people. They need to have the same human freedoms as people have in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, highest levels of freedom, at least economically in terms of participation. Or they need to be given complete constitutional recognition in that sense. And the second thing is that I think that the sense of the legal doctrines, they all emerge from a level of justification of state excess, because when you talk to people from Kashmir, they don't identify themselves as Indians, they identify themselves as Kashmiris, which is a political problem in which you have failed to win over local populations' belief in the Indian Union. Okay. So you're trying to fix that by shackling them, etc., things like that. And that's a political recognition, it's a political problem. And to employ martial measures to brutalize them will just lead to more cycles of violence. I'm very clear on that. But my constitutional position is unfixed. It's an integral part of India. And if you need to change that, you need to change it through a political process. That political process needs to be open to them and needs to be provided. But it is a part of it.
If anybody doesn't have a question, I have another one. Yeah.
We'll rotate.
Okay.
Yeah. Please, and
Comments also, like if you can help me.
Thanks about for this fascinating discussion. One question and a comment. Yeah, the question is about business records, particularly in the state of Rajasthan. At times we've seen whenever there's an examination happening in case, particularly government examination for police and probably for judges as well, they shut down the internet and they have been constant cases filed in the High Court where you will see some relief coming out, but the government will keep on imposing shutdown every year whenever there's an examination. So I just wanted to ask if you are dealing with that issue as to how judicial remedies
Yeah, that issue is there on IFF's website. You can go and check it out. You find a case for the Udaipur Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
It's unlikely people to go to the High Court. Okay. The only High Court direction which has come from there, unfortunately, it may be attributable to delays or the lack of that High Court's organizational history of hearing such matters on civil liberties, is that superintendents of police cannot issue internet shutdown orders. So there's improper delegation. Yeah, Rajasthan has been a historical problem, but there are certain things you need to recognize about Rajasthan as well. State cheating, etc., in public recruitment examinations is an actual political issue. It's a very big political issue. People in cities don't realize that. Okay, state lacks capacity in making sure these examinations can happen properly. Like if you have unemployment in a village, 100 men are sitting for the 2 posts, right? There's massive pressure on the existing state bureaucracy, which is split across caste lines. Who gets that? Okay. So I'm not justifying internet shutdowns at all. I'm just telling you what has been conveyed to me when I've interacted with the officials there. The second thing is Rajasthan possibly has the highest digital transparency of any state due to its online portal where even prior to the Anuradha Passi judgment, they were uploading the internet shutdown orders as they happened, before it happened. Okay, so that's why Rajasthan is easy to study. We were shocked when we filed RTIs in Bihar, and Bihar gave us 54 orders, right? So I think the Rajasthan data is much more available, easy, even prior to Anuradha Passi. But yeah, it's irrational what they're doing. It's completely irrational. It hurts the economy, it hurts the people there. And slowly these kind of practices jump from preventing cheating in exams to other things. They become worse.
Yeah, thanks so much for this. And the other issue was about the insider view of how these laws are being actually made. Who are the people who have the power to, let's say, come up with our initial ideas, initial drafts? Is it very public? Because I have, for a very brief period of time, for around 6 months, worked with the IT ministry where we were dealing with a few.
They're panel contractors, they're young kids who are 1 year, 2 years out of law school. They have this tremendous great opportunity to shape the future of a country, but they, with the great ideas that they have, they lack the benefit of working with much more experienced individuals who are non-partisan, because it's very difficult to work with the government because the government does not accept you. It does not even permit you to sit in what it calls a public consultation now, if it doesn't want you there. We've been turned away from public consultations, right? So the laws, the way they are being framed with the idea that we know better. We have the democratic legitimacy to make the law. Public consultation is a checkbox. The actual consultation is only for checking grammar at best. The private industry composes of the top 10 corporates in every industry sector. We're going to hear them out. Okay, we're going to share a draft with them. This is done by all ministries, not of the Ministry of IT. And it's been a practice for about 4 decades now. So the top 5, top 10 always used to get draft copies of the law or impact. And that sometimes that's useful, but needs to be done publicly, needs to get acknowledged. Expert committees, the way they're set up, all of that is a problem now. And which shows in the number of court challenges why everything is gridlocked, where everything looks like a highway to Sonipat. Think about it, because you lack foresight. If you don't have disagreement in the room, which is good intention, not with the intention of obstructing something, okay, then you can't improve because you will never see the problems which are about to come.
So I just asking if that part is also covered started to go because we'd like to see some standard procedures on how things
I don't know. Maybe I'll interview some bureaucrats, etc., things like that. But I'm much more interested in the political economy around this. So much more in terms of there's so much material over 3 decades already to present to people. From the start of launch of the internet on August 15th, 1984, 1995.
We'll just take a question online so that they're also involved. Just they're also.
This is from Pratik.
I won't answer the next question.
The person right, yeah. This is from Pratik. This is a senior member.
Thanks for your insights, Apar. I have a query. Are there any interesting comparison or insights from other countries, Russia, Turkey, that have a similar trajectory to a narrative of India? So there are 2 or 3 books which have been published. There's one by a Carnegie Fellow. He even interviewed me. Some of these, like you can look at, let's say, Freedom of the Net report itself. There are work by the National Endowment for Democracy. They are mapping what they call digital authoritarianism now. It's one of the drivers of backsliding of democracies, which includes kleptocracy, income inequality, climate change, things like that. So why the world is shit. Okay, so but yeah, yeah. So you can look at that, but it's not like India is the only country which is doing this, or this is uniquely an Indian problem. I think there will be some unique attributes, but I have not done a comparative analysis myself. I even don't do a comparative analysis with other South Asian countries because quite frankly, I feel that comparative analysis requires you to know 2 areas very well, and I don't know one area well right now, which is India and technology. So I may not have a complete answer. Back, then in front. Yeah.
So Max, first of all, thank you so much for the talk. And secondly, if you could comment a bit on the broadcasting services bill and how it is going to directly impact like independent creators who don't speak for the preferred parent.
So I've written an op-ed on that. In the interest of time, you can refer to it. I've done a press conference in 2 days back, organized by Vijh, and there is 18-page analysis I've done of the unofficial leaked copy. These 3 materials may provide you enough in terms of specifics on the broadcast services regulation bill. And you can also access that on Instagram. Guys. Okay. And there are reels there. Okay. There are reels there. So before I was transitioning to law and I was still setting up my law practice, now it's a little there. Okay. For about 3 months, I took some free time to set up a YouTube channel like everyone does when they're employed. Okay. So I'll make one video also and to check it out. I'll try to do it this Sunday if I feel up to it. But these 3 will be enough. Okay. Anybody at the back or we shift to the front? Okay. Yes, yes.
Unmute because the weed.
And I've been following your work, and I think you have written something about digital public health, like the issuing of Ayushman Bharat card, and how I think the ideas of surveillance and technocratic development is also populating to other fields like health and education, and maybe COVID can be blamed easily, but also it is not something that it started during COVID. It has been.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So if you think you will be able to.
Yeah, it wrenches me because I believe in. So yeah, like I'm a big admirer of people in the planning commission, not Niti Aayog, and that's my fault. I know my faults a little bit. I am a big admirer of Dr. Manmohan Singh, OG, not like today. Okay, so. But then I recognize that these frameworks have also prompted what is called the post-liberal order. This has given rise to what conservatism, nativism is there in our society. And that impacts public health because much more directly, because when you see the working groups around public health and the way the bureaucrats talk about it, they talk about it from these kind of quantifiable frameworks of efficiency, of budgetary allocations, that this is how much money you have, this is so many people are there, this is how we do it, this is how we achieve it. And it seems neat, but that's not how the world is. Everything is not your data point. And if you even reduce it to that, you're not acknowledging the qualitative aspects of public health. So yes, I have done a longer lecture, it's a written lecture last year in Pune on digital public health. Ayushman Bharat is a very small part of that, which I call as a rebranding thrice over. It was a rebranded thrice, guys, okay? It was called something else, and the government said this brand is not working, then it changed the name, then changed the name, then changed the name. Okay, so yeah, so this government. So yeah, so there are multiple things at its root, which I think revealing a public health approach, which became very, very clear during COVID. Privatization of public health, no longer public health. Privatization of health insurance, no longer universal coverage. You call it universal coverage, but it's not there. The 5 lakh is not there. So it's not there for like even higher income groups, low income groups, it's non-existent. The insurance industry is broken in India. Wrong prescriptions, expired medicines, etc. So I really feel that when you match your real world experience, even as a privileged English speaking Hindu male with the top percentile of society and your interactions in public health, why do I hear max mat jana, aims jana? Why do I hear this? Right? So are these problems going to be fixed by technology? So I think there's a broader foundational issue, what has happened after liberalization in 1991. And technology is one of the frameworks which helps it, but then we wouldn't be sitting in an air-conditioned hall like this, and like a lot of things wouldn't exist without liberalization.
Yeah, just to add to it, I think the danger is also of like calling India a huge success.
No, it's not.
No, the policymakers tend to sell, like last year with G20, India was hosting G20, and the way we revolutionized through Paytm and
Road ke aage pani bhara hua hai udhar.
These are all sold as the great way in which India can train other countries, other developing countries to set up their digital infrastructure for public health. And
I'm going to Mandapam today, my first visit. It's terrible the way they've reconstructed Pranti Milan. Back se kar lete hain, फटाफट करते हैं. I'll take 2 at a go, okay?
Yeah.
I'll leave at 2. I have to be at Mandapam at 4. So 2 घंटे लेके चलना. So
Just quickly.
I just wanted to know, we've talked a little bit about welfare with that, and there's a very different balance between welfare and ease of living that technology requires trying to strike. Vijh, for example, you have a line that's shorter than every other line in the airport.
no, it's not. It's longer. Sometimes.
When you go to the
Yeah.
but it's under the pretense that it is going to be more efficient as usage, same for Ayushman Bharat and other welfare programs out there. In this context, where a lot of the population is linking technology with efficiency, what role does surveillance play here? How do we ensure that state surveillance does not basically completely undo the welfare mechanisms that are existing? Because there is a positivity to it, there's no doubt about that. But there is also a fear that the data will not be used or will be misused. So how do we find a balance between it?
Balance is by acknowledging that there's a risk. And I think there's a lack of acknowledgement of risk today. Because even when you read the policy frameworks, when they talk about data protection, it comes at the end. And they don't say data protection, they say data security. Okay, look at the mighty documents. A lot of them do this. So I think until you integrate data protection, privacy, acknowledge the political risks of sharing and breaking data laws, etc., it won't happen. And on the contrary, you have the National Economic Survey in 2011 saying that we need to break data laws. We need to unlock the true value of data. We're bundling different databases, right? And they don't acknowledge the political risks which are arising. So I think we can start working on these issues when there is an intent to work on them. And the intent is missing right now. Solutions can be discovered. Solutions are always complex, but people need to first start working on them. And you can't start working on them if people don't want to work on them, right?
And then question.
Hi, sorry, I'm very enthusiastic to ask you this question, but it's more of a question and suggestion about the work that you have been developing for a while now. I noticed that throughout this lecture as well, there was a common theme of sort of like digital anxiety that has always existed in people. It's a newer term that has been coming around through the development of this. Through the development of digital infrastructure in our country and otherwise. And like you mentioned, people have been scared to voice their opinion. And the example of Gujarat that you mentioned in your lecture. How exactly do you think there is space in your work to be able to incorporate the relevance of this digital anxiety in this day and age?
I'll definitely think about it. The only reason I may not do it is that it broadens up the work a little bit towards areas of mental health, and I'm not good in terms of understanding that because I've not read that literature well enough.
I understand that, but the only reason the reason I wanted to suggest it was because of not because you'd have to necessarily highlight the nuance of it, but rather just the importance of it in this day and age, even without getting into the nitty-gritty details of the psychological aspects and etc.
No, I'll think about it. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, by the way, I'm a new person in this field, so when you commented on simplification in your book, I would really, really appreciate it because much of the literature in this area is very complicated and you initially.
Boring.
I know, but it's a nice introduction if it's a little simple because that's why I would vouch for that area, even if I'm the only person in that area. Then when bringing up her point about privacy, there's a trend at least right now where the right of privacy, at least that exists in India, is getting large state exceptions, at least in legislation like the DPDP Act. Currently, even for surveillance, at least in my novice understanding of it, there is a large amount of state exceptions, even for state surveillance.
Yeah.
And that includes, at least in use cases that I've seen in railway stations, for all of that. So I would suggest you could also incorporate that in your work, and also if you have something to say about that.
I'll definitely think about that. You're right, railway stations, etc. They have facial recognition systems there. They collect it. Delhi Police is also implement a system which links it to driver's licenses, other IDs, and public transits, etc. Even the metro, for instance, people say it's safe in that sense, but the frisking which is done before you get into a metro doesn't make sense to me. And they confiscate alcohol. I don't know, what's the deal there? What will happen? So they're doing it. It's weird to get frisked before you board a metro, and that's a very Indian thing. It's not happened in other South Asian countries I've traveled to.
Yeah, fine. Yes.
Thank you. Good that you brought up trends actually, because my question has more to do with larger economic trends that we're seeing. Firstly, we're seeing a push on 5G and other technologies, consolidation in telecom, consolidation in infrastructure in general. Certain players are being obviously favored. So very quick, maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute on where do you think we go from here? Obviously, in privacy and other surveillance and other related fields, we are seeing control and consolidation towards the state. But we saw recently in the elections how the exit polls showed one thing and the actual result was something else. So where do you think we go from here as a public and as a state? How does that interaction play out, let's say 5 years down the line?
5 years down the line, I don't know what will happen. But my sense is that so I can use a metaphor is that if India is like a person, right, it got a fever, now the fever has broken, and now it will go down slowly, just in terms of. So the voting percentage for BJP remained constant from 2019 to 2024, which shows that it's hit its peak in a sense, right? And now it'll be interesting. Maybe they'll have a UPA too. Let's see. They've referred the passport bill to JPC. I indicated a problem. It would not have happened 2 years back.
Right.
So let's see. The state polls are there. And I think a lot of people are also watching and seeing, especially in the institutional apparatus, because they care about the question which you have posed. What will happen in the next 5 years, because their jobs depend on where they will go, how will they promote it, what will they do, right?
Right.
So at least we've reached there.
Thank you.
Asking that question.
Last question.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about the IT Act, the Telegraph Act, and the IPC, and a small legal doubt in that. Isn't there a legal tenet that says you always follow the narrower law than the broader? So any sort of yes. So any sort of international terms of the IPC would be not involved in that sense, wouldn't it?
Yes. After Anuradha Vasim, which clearly stated that the CRPC power under Section 144, I don't know the Bharatiya, whatever. So, yeah, what is that power? The curfew power. You can't use the curfew power because a much more specific power exists.
And also that because we spoke about state surveillance and because we spoke of somebody brought out digital anxiety, I also wanted to ask if you'd be mentioning anything about state paranoia and in that sense touch upon fascism a little bit. And because you're talking about the political economy and the different manifestations in which surveillance can take place, for example, through many institutions as well. And even now you mentioned when it comes, for example, knowledge production. Now you got this semester you have cameras in our classroom, and if that is the surveillance, I don't know what is.
Yeah, but you guys like it. I've had chats with Ashoka and Jindal kids. They said that it's great, the security on campus. It's great, you need to give a biometrics. Yeah. Oh, we are not Ashoka kids. That's what you guys are saying.
No, but I would agree with you on that because there was a protest that was organized and 4 people turned up. And also, so will you be touching about that considering that there's also an active political censorship that's happening in the university, and also considering the fact that our chancellor is a
So I think all of those things exist. Okay, but the thing is that that's not my area of work. I'm not a political economy is political economy of technology. I can't. So the thing is that there are people on Twitter who exist to give takes. And there is that guy I showed in the slide. He exists to give takes. Okay, I exist to do work, right? Like 8,000, 9,000 words at least, and then make this presentation, right? Think about it and work on these cases for close to a decade. Be part of these movements. So if I work on public education and private universities, then I will feel confident enough to have these takes. I have these opinions, but those are for my friends over coffee. Those are not for you. Yeah. Okay. So I have these opinions. Okay. I think these things, but that's not part of my work. Because that's not part of my expertise. And of course, I may voice it at some time as a citizen, but that's not part of this talk. And I'm not self-censoring myself because I'm scared of Jindal. I'm not. It's just that I've not looked at his life closely enough.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. Reach Delhi.
Yeah. So we'll just wrap it.
Okay. I was late. It's my fault. We'll take one online one. So
Yeah.
somebody is not.
Hiram, maybe a word on AI actually. So
AI.
yes.
So
what risk it will bring in terms of the.
So AI, I would suggest that AI Now Institute and Data and Society are two excellent places to look at in terms of AI studies. And the third one is the Ada Lovelace Institute. They are putting out fantastic papers which are looking at AI, not only from the perspective of generative AI, which is ChatGPT and Claude, but what is the economic basis of production? What does it do for the existence of what is termed as big tech? Are those same companies also now at the forefront of AI? And also, what does it promise and what does it deliver? It's a very, very broad subject. It goes beyond generative AI. And I do feel it's revolutionary. It needs to be integrated into our practices. It will be useful to us as human beings. But then again, I think it's going through a hype cycle in some ways as well. Okay, so but there's a lot to be said about AI, and maybe for that, next year I can come to something.
Thank you so much, everybody, for patiently waiting and then attending.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
I can't. I will need somebody.